Andrew, you still in the office?
Yeah, so we have started the meeting, Al. It's live, and I'm just waiting for some more folks to come on board. So just for the attendees, just going to give it a few minutes for folks to join. And we are recording, and you should have a chat and a Q&A function, which you can use. So just to introduce myself, my name is Andrew O'Leary. I'm the Assistant Superintendent, New Bedford School Department for Finance and Operations. Al, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Al Oliveira, Director of Facilities in New Bedford Public Schools.
So Al, if you just want to maybe get closer to the mic or directly into it. I'll be leading the presentation anyway, but just a little faint. So what we're going to get started, and what we're going to do is we're going to discuss finance, facilities, and operations in the context of the pandemic and the current disruption to our operations and what we've been doing over the past few months and will continue to do for the rest of the year. And we can entertain any questions and respond to any inquiries you have about that. And I'm going to run through some reports in slide format. And if we do have time, we can answer any questions. And if we do have time, we will have a quick look at some of my favorite topics, funding and finance and budget, as we start to get into budget season and plan for fiscal year 22, school year 22-23, which we'll all hope will be, quote unquote, a little more normal than the year we're experiencing. But let me dive right in with a presentation. And as questions come up, feel free to type them into the Q&A section. And if there are any audio issues or any feedback you want to give us, just let us know that also. Let's see. So you should be seeing the slideshow now with the introductory slide. And let's get started. So first thing we want to talk about is we want to talk about our buildings. And here's an outline of our buildings. And this is an analysis we did earlier in the year when we talked about coming back to school. About August, there was a lot of discussion about how we could come back, in what form we could come back, and there was discussions about building readiness. And so you look at all of our buildings here, you look at the square footage, and you look at the individuals in the building, if FTEs, meaning full-time equivalent, basically people in the building, and how many people per square foot. And you'll all recall that conversation about spacing and distancing. And so we did that analysis, and that analysis lined up with our return plan, our plan to get cohorts of students back in building. And so New Bedford has a very unique layout of buildings. We've got buildings built as recent as 2016, and we've got buildings as old as anyone else in the state. Some go back to before the First World War. And so you'll see the spread right here of our buildings, and you'll see that they fit into three buckets: before World War II, after World War II, and then the more modern buildings, everything from the three large middle schools to the Lincoln School, right up to our newer schools, Taylor and the Jacobs School. And so, as you can imagine, when we approach the buildings, they're each going to have different building systems. And so every building has a heating and a cooling system and security systems, and every building presents challenges. And so this is what we faced when we started planning how to come back to school. And this is what we've been facing throughout the year. How can we maintain a safe, healthy environment for students and staff throughout the year, and what need we do? And so what I'm going to outline with Mr. Oliveira is the steps we've taken and continue to take, and the investments we've made in making the buildings safe and healthy. That's a term we've started to use a lot more, healthy buildings. How do we get to healthy buildings? And if we want to look ahead to next year and the year beyond, now that we have this experience and now that people value healthy buildings, is this somewhere we would want to keep investing in FY22 budgets and beyond in our healthy buildings? And so when we think about health, we think about the CDC. We're all familiar in this country due to the pandemic. We're familiar with the work of the CDC. When you talk about an occupational environment, you talk about OSHA. They guide safe occupational environments. And then we are governed in part by the regulations of DESC, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And so everything we've done this year and everything we continue to do is guided by these regulatory bodies, the CDC, OSHA, and DESE. And if there are any additional questions about their guidance, you can certainly put it in the Q&A section. So most important for getting back to school, what the key to applying all of our building improvement and healthy building strategies is funding. And so we did, in fact, receive significant amounts of funding, and we are in line to receive substantial funding going forward as well, as are other public schools in the state and the country. So one of the first things to come out, you might recall, in March was ESSER, the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Funds that came to districts. And so New Bedford we applied for those and received those and got those set up in our financial system. And there was an additional coronavirus relief fund, CVRF fund, that we received. Remote learning was a big factor. And so how are districts going to get technology, and the remote learning funds came to the district as well. And now that we're looking into FY22 and beyond, there have been additional funds approved. And so there's an additional bucket of fund beyond December 30th to help us build in our different building and safety systems. And looking ahead to next year and beyond, you've seen these discussions, I'm sure, about Congress and the State House, an additional round of ESSER, or emergency relief funding. So all of this comes through the Finance and Operations Office, and we have a team here that manages those funds. And as we'll see, the fall is a great example of that, of the work we did in the fall, how we get those funds in, spend them per the regulations, but spend them in an impactful way that's going to ensure we can maintain our main operation, which is the education of students and the support of teachers in classrooms, in buildings. And so this is just a straight grab from the state website. It gives you a sense of some of the funds that are there. These are the databases where the state lists the funds, and this is what we monitor in my office and make sure that New Bedford is receiving the funds and we're setting them up and spending them appropriately. So you'll see the very top category from the spreadsheet. You'll see we received our normal Chapter 70, and there was an additional increase. We received the ESSER funds right here in the middle. We got some reopening funds. And then just recently, the governor's budget has released additional funds, an additional $1 million for New Bedford. And the federal fund estimate is what you'll see at the bottom. Federal fund estimate for the future years is ESSER 2. And so these are funds, as we'll discuss, what we talk about every month at school committee, where we publicly report on these funds. And as we build our FY22 budget that will run from July 1 to June 30th of 2022, we will be talking more and more about investing these funds. So all of the resources were lined up and ready to go in August to allow us to implement the healthy building strategies we'll talk about. And so the main fund we relied on this year was what we call CVRF. And you'll see the amount of work we actually did took about $3 million. That $2.9 million was what the district spent between August and December 30th, which is quite a substantial investment. So it gives you a sense of what does it take? What does it take for 12,000 student district to bring students back to a safe environment, to maintain a safe environment for staff, and to maintain? What extra did it take? And it took at least this amount, the 2.9 million. And we'll just have a breakdown of where that went. You'll note that we invested in additional custodial positions. We maintained additional nursing positions. There were additional stipends and FTE, meaning positions for teachers to do remote learning. But mainly the money went into the buildings and went into supplies in the buildings. And we all know the famous, the well-known acronym at this point, PPE. And we made, and other districts made as well, enormous investments in PPE, personal protective equipment. And as part of our agreement with staff and other districts' agreements with their staff, we furnish staff with all the PPE they might need, all the cleaning, personal cleaning products, all the masks, everything from gowns to glasses to gloves. And then we meet with our partners in the teachers union and other unions. We meet with them regularly and monitor PPE supplies. And this is a quick snapshot here to run down what we have for PPE. So every month we review this and we put in additional PPE orders. And so this is where the operations end comes in, the finance and operations. You can see that the funding came from the state for return to school, and this is how it's applied, and then it's monitored from there. And so we see this is a rather substantial amount of PPE. This is just a snapshot of how it breaks down by school. But if you consider that we have 2,000 staff members and thousands of students rotating in and out, you can quickly see how PPE can be used up and how it needs to be replenished. And so our ability to access those funds early, to make the orders, to get them in the schools, and then monitor from there, has allowed us to ensure a safe return to healthy buildings where staff can have all their safety supply needs met. And I'll let Mr. Oliveira jump in here, because a key piece of our return was cleaning schools and increasing the standards or the regularity by which we clean schools. Now, there is some debate in terms of transmission of coronavirus, in terms of most effective strategies, if it's an aerosol-based virus and whether there is transmission from surfaces or not, but we certainly didn't debate that issue. We made sure that all of our surfaces were sanitized and disinfected on a regular basis. And we'd had some additional tools that we invested in to allow that to happen. So if you want to take it away, Al, and discuss the cleaning and sanitizing.
We were lucky enough to be ahead of the curve on this. We purchased several units. These are what we call atomizing. We don't want to use the term gun, but distribution units. We purchased several years ago to combat the flu and the other viruses that we had. So we already had some of these in-house. Once Corona kicked in, we purchased heavy volume, several backpacks and several different units for schools. And what this ultimately does is you throw a safe disinfectant into the product, and you just spray, and there's a electric charge that will dry that component within seconds. So this is one of the industry leaders right now, is the Victory units that we use. Everything we use is a safe, clean, EPA approved green product. We have several that we're using throughout the system. And then what we do every night is we have the definites. We have to clean, we have to remove trash, and then we have to disinfect. Those are the three items that we have to do daily. And by doing that, we're able to be ahead of the curve for the following morning. We utilized ventilation as a component. We utilized scrubbers. At some point, we purchased over 750 scrubbers, individual classrooms and throughout the buildings. We worked on various building components, but this is one of the key factors that we have at our possession. This works absolutely wonderful. Custodians use it throughout the day. They use it during the day and definitely at night.
Do you want to talk about, Al, I had mentioned it in terms of our hiring. So we hired additional custodial staff this year, and there was additional training as well for those staff.
Absolutely. Part of this plan, we developed a disinfecting plan, which those three items that we just stated were a key component. We also added custodial staff for every building. We went above the normal protocol of what you would normally have in square footage for custodians. At no point did we have any schools with just one custodian. There were a couple that we had with just one, but now we added a second one to every school. We have overlapping shifts, and we've been training. We trained the senior custodians to train the staff. So, and we're monitoring that on a daily basis. There's been checklists that we've been developing, and we constantly upgrade as we need to.
So that's the custodial end and the daily cleaning end. And we've had that success. Of course, going into the fall, if we've got additional positions, we weren't sure, but the facilities team did a great job finding additional staff and getting them implemented. So our plan was successful. We did have the funds. We had the plan to implement a higher standard of cleaning, and we were able to get the staff on board and get the staff trained. So that has been going successfully with little disruption. So then the other key part of the building, and the one we alluded to, was around the air flow and air exchange in the building. And that was a big talking point in August and September. How can we ensure that we have safe levels of airflow and air exchange? And we're all of us citizens are familiar right now with what we need to do in terms of ventilation. But this was a relatively new concept or a new discussion as we were getting ready for schools to come back. And so we took a look at our buildings, and what you'll see here on the screen is the type of ventilation in each building. And some had what was called natural ventilation, which essentially means no formal ventilation system. And so this was a real deep dive or a deep look at our ventilation. And we did hire some expert engineering firms to do a report on our ventilation. So they walked through every building, looked at the systems there, wrote up their recommendations, and we then took steps to implement their recommendations. And we had a number of meetings weekly until we got it right. We had a number of meetings weekly, and we invited the various staff representatives to that. And so you'll see we do have the newer buildings from 1970s onwards have relatively full mechanical HVAC systems, and some had partial and some had none. So we did have a dilemma then as to what we would do to supplement and how would we ensure ventilation. And essentially ensure means to have clean or exchanged air in those buildings, because if we're bringing folks back to buildings, then that is increasing the likelihood of aerosol transmission or increasing the risk. And we'll talk about some of the strategies. These were the companies we employed, Bala and TRC, we employed to look at our buildings, and their recommendations were in line with what the DESC had put out over the summer as well, in that all of your ventilation systems, you should run them in economizer mode, in a mode that allows the outdoor air to be exchanged with greater frequency. So the more you're exchanging that air, then the less likely there is to be any a virus transmitting in the air within. We know it's an aerosol-based virus. Then another key step we took was filters or filtration. So within many HVAC systems, there are filters, and the filters usually have a pretty basic standard, which is called MERV. And the minimum efficiency rating value is MERV, and that's usually around a MERV 8. So MERV 8 is a certain standard, but a much higher standard is a MERV 13. And so the recommendation was move to MERV 13, which is far more likely if there is a virus in the air, it's far more likely to get caught. The aerosols are more likely to get caught in the MERV 13 filter. But as you can imagine, there was something of a run worldwide on MERV filters and a shortage. So we outlined how many MERV 13 filters we would need and got about ordering them as well. And as of December, we have a majority coverage right now in the buildings that can take MERV 13 filters. So on the filtration end, those schools that have the ability to take a stronger filter, we were able to get a majority of those covered, but we still had this dilemma of how are we going to increase air exchange, purification, and ventilation where there aren't mechanical systems. And so there was a lot of talk of, well, opening windows and allowing rooms to air out. But as you can imagine, if the return to school was in October and we're getting into November and December, and as we can see today, the temperatures don't permit you to constantly open windows. So the next step we took was the purchase of what are called HEPA air filtration units or air purification units. And HEPA is another, HEPA is another standard within filters that are in these standalone purification ventilation units. And these are relatively expensive, but we did have the ability to apply the funds that the state did award us to purchase these. And then we went through a process called procurement, which is what a lot of the work that we do in the finance and operations office. Procurement means finding the goods you want in the regulatorily appropriate manner to purchase those. And as a public body, we have to follow a lot of rules and develop an expertise in following those rules. So to be able to get enough and procure enough of these air purification units in time to get into school was quite a heavy lift. But thanks to Mr. Oliveira's team and the team that works with me in my office, we were able to turn those around. And it was a very large investment of about $500,000 at least. And we've added to that in the past few months as we've opened up some basement rooms, things like that. So the district did invest about $500,000 in these air purification units that we deployed to every classroom pretty much that needed them. And here's some details that we did do a lot of research. We became well versed in the various studies and research on HEPA standards on air purification units, because a small desktop air purification unit you might have in your house, you might have in your room, was not what we were looking for. We were looking for the highest industry standard. And I recall things were happening like the California wildfires and stuff that disrupted the supply chain. So certain suppliers weren't able to respond to us as quickly as we needed. But ultimately, we were able to secure these air scrubber units that did meet these standards of exchanging air and meet the standards of having 99.97% filtration, which is the HEPA standard. So if you go into a classroom now, you will either see air being ventilated mechanically using a MERV 13 filter system, or you will see a standalone HEPA unit that's running within that classroom. And just some more details on how MERV 13 and HEPA work. We never thought we would have to get to this level of a scientific analysis, but that was the lesson of this year. Another factor here is the student transportation. And so we do have a modified student transportation system right now that's aligned with the cohort system. We are fortunate to have a very strong relationship with the 3 busing vendors in the district, and they've been able to modify their operation to meet the lower numbers of students. And then we have a dedicated transportation office that's been working out the logistics of that to ensure that we are able to line up the busing with the cohort system that the district has adopted. So as we look ahead through the rest of the year, we will be able to, based on the cohort system, we will be able to transport all the students that are eligible for transportation. So that was a huge concern back in August before we returned to school, but we are able to meet the safety standards of students spaced on buses with the windows open, with air again being exchanged, and that has been a success. So let me just stop there for a second and see if we do have any questions in the Q&A, and which I think should be functional, and or the chat. We're running through a lot of information. So as one topic I wanted to bring up, Al, was the UV, the ultraviolet. So as we look ahead for the rest of the year, and as we've learned more about filtration and purification of air, one tool we've come across is systems that use ultraviolet light and to kill pathogens. And while certainly we're going to get to a point beyond coronavirus and beyond this pandemic, it's long been a goal of school districts to have cleaner air in buildings or have a higher standard. And so we've had a crash course in that. And so what we're looking at is what investments we can make in our air systems in buildings that can ensure a higher standard all around of air quality, air flow, and air exchange. Because in a normal year, quote unquote, we will still have flu viruses. In a normal year, we will still have things like the norovirus, and we will still have thousands of students and staff in buildings. So we should have the highest possible standard of airflow and air exchange, even in quote unquote a normal year. And now that we know how to do that, we will be looking to apply that next year. And one way we want to do that is with the UV systems in the larger elementaries like Gomes, Haymack, Pulaski, for example. Do you want to talk about that UV system now?
We
just want to speak up a little.
Few weeks ago, a few months ago, we started a pilot program at the Hayden McFadden School. We added 8 UV canisters at the ceiling level. There's multiple ways of distributing this type of UV system. But with the type of building that we had at the Haymack, we figured that we would be able to utilize a honeycomb type system where air within a certain radius of that honeycomb would be drawn into the unit. The ultraviolet light would zap any type of molecules or any type of virus, and then it would just be right back to fresh air at that point. So we did our assessment. We calculated some of the numbers We spoke to the principal and the vice principals, but at the end of the day, it was determined that this was a great product for a few other schools that we had in mind. Andrew did bring up some of the larger elementary schools. We have the Pulaskis, we have the Gomes, we have the Carneys. Those type of ventilation systems are not as strong as the middle schools or the high school. So we figured we would start there. So right now we do have a PO established. Equipment is on order. We're waiting on an actual delivery and installation date. It really doesn't take long for an install. We will find power for the units and we will have those installed. But what we did with the other schools at this point, once we did our analysis, we determined the best location that we would have gaps, where we would have areas where we didn't have strong ventilation. So we focused on those key areas. What that did is that allowed us to add more to the schools, and then follow back to Haymack. We'll add a couple more at Haymack, where we can have a typical type of coverage throughout the building. So needless to say, once those are up and running, the entire building will be would have key areas where they'll have great ventilation. Then they'll have UV in areas that will not have sufficient ventilation. So we feel good. We feel good with this type of unit. Again, putting those in some rooftop units, we're going to be a hard sell financially. So these were the best. If you've gone through the district, you'll be able to see a lot of these units currently right now in some of the gymnasiums, and all those were used for was for just ventilation. So what we did is we removed some of those and added some UVs in that same capacity.
Thank you. So let me just share another part of the presentation, because I think it puts some things in context. And if we look ahead to FY22, if you think back to when we talked about the different funding that's coming in. So before the coronavirus crisis hit in March, there was a lot of talk about the Student Opportunity Act. The Student Opportunity Act revised funding, school funding in Massachusetts, and to help address some of the gaps that districts like New Bedford and others were facing, basically where we were, according to every analysis, we were being shortchanged in terms of the need and in terms of the obligation to meet needs and in terms of the state funding available. So the Student Opportunity Act promised to provide additional funding. However, the virus hit, which hit some state revenues. And so now there's a lot of discussion about right-sizing that and getting back to meeting those promises. And the reason I bring that up is a key part of the Student Opportunity Act was one of the components that districts could spend money on, and one of the components that the superintendent in his budget presentation mentioned and was mentioned in our Student Opportunity Act plan was facilities and maintenance. Because as you can imagine, there is that stereotype of school districts not investing in their facilities and quote unquote having crumbling facilities. However, part of that was due to the fact that districts didn't have available funds. And so you'll see here, the blue line on the graph is how much New Bedford schools over the years has spent on facilities and maintenance. And so you'll see around 2010, New Bedford schools that year spent non-inflation adjusted 14 million in facilities and maintenance. And that was about 12% or so of the budget that year. Now, if you move up to about 2017 on the blue line, you'll see that on a dollar level, New Bedford spent even less on facilities and maintenance in that year. So if you think about inflation, meaning everything costs more every other year, and if you think about facilities, whereas we all know that facilities, the inflation in construction and maintenance and that kind of thing would increase at a greater percentage every year, we can really see that districts, the Student Opportunity Act advocates were correct, and that districts did not have the opportunity to invest sufficient amounts in facility and maintenance. And again, you look at other districts who are eager to put a plan together for their facilities to bring students and staff safely back. This is a factor, because as all of us who own a car or a home know, if you don't invest in regular maintenance, the ultimate cost, be it a replacement cost or a serious repair and reconstruction cost, is going to be higher. Costs are always lower if you can regularly invest in your facilities and maintenance. And so that's what we started to do around 2018-19, invest more a greater percentage of our budget. And so we're going to be running the numbers later this year, and I expect them to be higher and be closer to this green line. The ideal would be 10% of our budget every year goes into facilities and maintenance. The ideal would be the red. However, if you think about if we at least increase a certain percentage every year, what we call a parity target, that would be the green line. So I think we can expect to be a lot closer to the green line in this year, and again, to make additional investments next year. So we can get close to having facilities that are regularly maintained and there's regular investments put into them. Because if we've learned one thing this year, it's that investment pays back. If you are able to invest in better air flow, air exchange, better facilities, everything from the restrooms to the classrooms, to the Wi-Fi, to the safety and security systems in the building, and to the general building safety, from making sure that there are no parts of the building that folks have to avoid, and the buildings are a comfortable place to work. We know that students will thrive, and people can feel good about where they work. And so that's going to be a key focus for the superintendent's budget that we're implementing this year and next year. And if you think back to those funds, which are relatively substantial that we're receiving, this is a great place to invest them, because they're one-time funds, essentially. We'll have them for this year and next year. And so you want to invest them in what we call non-recurring costs. Non-recurring costs mean you put them in for one item and they're not there next year or the year after. Then we can make a large investment this year and next year, and then maintain that at a smaller level going forward. So as we get into the FY22 budget, we will be looking at how we can invest in those things. So as Mr. Oliveira described, that's just one part of a healthy building, is having air quality. And we've learned a lot this year. And one book I keep by my side is the Healthy Building publication from the Harvard School. And it talks about some great strategies for how you can ensure that students and staff can be in a healthy environment. Let me just check the questions. And I'll let you answer, Al. We do have a question about how often the atomizers are deployed, if you want to talk about that process.
So what we've done is we've asked the custodians to continuously monitor the pre-filters. The pre-filters should get cleaned as needed, at most cases once a week. But wherever it's needed, you could do it every day. You can do it anywhere between two times a day. That's a filter that simply just gets removed and simply washed. The other filters, the carbon filters, those are changed when you change the HEPA filters. HEPA filters are a high efficient particulate air filter. As long as it's not getting wet, the filter can last up to a year. We have several changes in hand, so if need be, we can make those changes. We're hoping that we can go 6 months and then change those HEPA filters. So right now, manufacturers told us you can go up to a year as long as it doesn't get wet, but we're hoping to change those in about 6 months.
Okay, thank you. So as we wrap up, I just want to again make a pitch for the FY22 budget. We're very eager. We'll be meeting with different stakeholders, obviously meeting with the school committee, meeting with school councils and others as we discuss the FY22 investments we're going to make, and as we discuss how these federal investments are going to be spent. So I would direct folks to check out the school department website. Let me just share it here. So if you go to New Bedford Schools website, and you can see there's a finance and operations section. And at the finance and operations section, is that coming up right now, Al? The page, I'm not sure I put up the right page. I was trying to put up the finance and operations page of the school department website. There you go. So if you go to the New Bedford Schools website, you'll see there's a finance and operations page, and you can scroll down and you can see a breakdown of how we spend our budget. And then you'll see a number of links for the budget book, and you'll click on the budget book, and that will give you a breakdown of all of our spending by department. And what we're doing right now is working on the FY22 budget book. So this is the FY21 budget book posted to our website. And there's a whole host of information there for folks to review and look over and see where all of our funding is allocated. And also, another place for folks to look at would be the monthly reporting to the school committee. So monthly, we report to the school committee as to where the money is being spent. I'll just give you an example of that. You'll see that these are the kind of reports we give to the school committee of our total budget and how it's spent. And again, one of the categories there on the right, you'll see is facilities and maintenance. And so we're eager to ensure, you'll see already, we talked about that $14 million figure, you'll see already we have a close to $15 million figure. So we're trying to reach those targets on facility and maintenance. But you'll see, obviously, the largest expenses are teaching services, special education, and others, which are equally important as our core mission. So those monthly reports are available at the school committee, and our budget book is available on the website. So absent any other questions, that pretty much does it for us. We'll make a pitch for 2 other important meetings that are happening later this week. Tomorrow night is the health services are going to give you a rundown on everything they've been doing and are doing and answer any questions and concerns you would have. And then the teaching and learning team will be on Wednesday, also at 5:30. Okay, so that's it for us. And again, we are available in the Finance and Operations Office, and we are available on our website for any questions you might have. Thanks, folks.